The problem is, and here's the positive for me, is that some of the ideas under all of this mess are kind of solid gold for me. They just had they needed the focus put on them properly. There's some really interesting storyline potential here that is hinted at but not fully explored with Chris and Jake, which is, I kind of put these characters here because I thought Leon and Ada should be an episode. They're characters that are intrinsically linked. Not really thinking that Chris and Jake's story together here is really important. You have Chris Redfield on his vengeance tear trying to track down Ada Wong, who, yes, you're right, Steve, for whatever reason, is just wandering around going, tee, and running away from Chris while she's trying to do her world domination, is also equally more interested in just winding him up. But he's beset on vengeance. And he also thinks that Jake is owed vengeance for the fact that Chris killed his estranged father. Or, estranged might not be the right word. He never met him. But then there's the scene where there are a few tense scenes about do they know who each other are. And we get to the point where they do know what's up. And Chris admitted to Jake that, I know your dad. I killed your dad. It was business and it was personal. And he gives Jake the chance, even at the end of the world, to kill him and get his vengeance, because that's what he thinks people want, maybe? I don't know. And Jake spares him because of, and we'll talk about this later, the impact that Sherry as a character has had on his personality. And it's massively important for Chris's arc because his whole story is about his drive for vengeance. And then this moment where he presents himself kind of, take aim and fire, and Jake spares him. I think his hint at retirement probably should have come after that scene rather than before. He should have had his personality shift around this time and kind of gets over his own rage and his own obsession. All of that stuff is buried under all the muck in this game, and that's so interesting. If the story was more about that, and I haven't played Leon and Ada's campaigns for the podcast yet, so I might change my mind in a month when we get there. I feel like that stuff is superfluous or a different game. It should have been about the relationship between Chris Redfield and the sudden appearance of a Wesker who's got complicated feelings about why his dad isn't around. Maybe it's a little bit overdramatic and silly, but I couldn't help but watch those scenes and be like, there's something here. And it's like 2 minutes of gold in a 60-hour game of slop, unfortunately. James, how do you feel about the campaign of Chris? Story-wise,
I didn't think about that. It's a great point you made, Si. Yeah, thank you. You've turned. You've given me a little bit.
I've tried desperately to see good in this game.
there's like a little bit of light that's just shined through this sandwich. I am going to be critical again, of the writing here, when it comes to the story. Because, anybody who's followed action movies or any kind of character writing at all knows that Chris hammered those nails into Piers's coffin so many times during this entire campaign.
Yeah.
And it was so forced. And it wasn't, I'm not talking about characterization here. I'm not talking about Chris Redfield as a character. I'm talking mechanically, the writing was bad. It was... He was consistently saying, when we get out of here, it's like the guy saying, oh, that bus almost hit me, and then gets hit by a bus. He was constantly doing that with Piers throughout the bloody thing. And then you got Piers. Listen, I love Piers, right? But this kid, brought Chris out of retirement. The warning signs were all there. And then he Pikachu faced when Chris was an asshole and was also not up to the challenge. Consistently, it happened 3 or 4 times. He was consistently going, oh God, Chris isn't actually my hero. He's actually just a traumatized middle-aged man, and it was heartbreaking in a way. I think it would have been more heartbreaking if they just spent a little bit more time on it. Nurtured what you were talking about, Si, as well. And instead of doing the full circle, the Ouroboros, some might say, and just going back on itself, they should have, they should have built it parallel, and expanded on that those story beats. Piers dying, I don't believe he did die, but I don't believe Lisa Trevor died either, so what can you do? People, Wesker, don't die in explosions despite them being dead on the floor on camera. So I don't believe he's dead. He's probably in the bottom of the ocean, having a great time. Yeah, God. It is, when you think about the story of Chris's campaign, it's just very simple, isn't it? Like you said earlier, Sai, it's just soldier men in soldier land doing soldier things.
Yep.
And it's really forced trauma.
Yeah.
Like it's not thought about. It's not that, writers who have actually researched this trauma, or kind of gone through it, with other people and got experience. That's why it feels so muddled, because it's not been thoroughly thought out. And I wish it did, because I really do like Piers, and I think he deserved more. He just wanted a hero, and I wish we got more information about Piers. And like we mentioned about those story things earlier, they could have worked if they actually added anything to the overall universe, but they never did. Just like the game didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It introduces characters like Piers and then kills them off in one go. It's just it sucks because there's so much potential in that. And the more you think about it, the wasted potential of it is so frustrating, because Chris getting fueled with rage and vengeance over this team that we're not that invested into because we didn't know them as the player. But maybe there's something in that. Is like, okay, so but why this? And if he could have a moment to be like, I never got to avenge the Stars team properly because there was no one person I could attribute the blame to, and or Wesker killed Spencer and took that opportunity away from me. Like, they never talk about why. Okay, so why are you specifically, where has this vengeance come from that we've never seen before? Where is this like a trauma build up? But no, it's because it's like a single encapsulated story. They probably didn't even think about it that deeply. But yeah,
I think that's it. I think literally they didn't want to go too deep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they probably had. Well, maybe they might have had a story that was deep at one point.
Yeah,
thought,
maybe.
But this is Resident Evil. We don't want to go too deep. Let's make this as shallow as possible. But unfortunately, the rest of the game is also shallow in every aspect.
Jordan, any thoughts on Chris's story?
Yes, and I will firstly make the observation that this game obviously very much was intended to be sort of shaped around sort of like being a big Hollywood blockbuster movie. It frames all of its gameplay like that, frames its cutscenes like that. And it felt very much, when it comes to sort of storytelling or any kind of writing or any kind of depth to the characters, it kind of felt very much like, when maybe a TV series ends up getting a movie special, or, just gets a full-blown movie, and you have all this kind of depth with a television series, and then so the movie ends up feeling more like an event. You're not really going to have any kind of meaningful depth to any kind of characters. It's really going to be a big crescendo. It's going to be whatever was being paid off beforehand. But these movies, spin-offs, they're common within TV shows and anime and stuff like that. And they can be fun. They can be very bombastic, but you don't necessarily take away anything of major sort of storytelling value. You're not really necessarily going to be pushing the characters. You're just going to be reaching certain event conclusions. And that very much feels like what Resident Evil 6 was aiming for. As such, it ends up having a bunch of campaigns that are simply too short and too shallow to really explore anything that previous Resident Evil games have. And especially with Chris's story, I think it's probably a subject matter that was simply not something that the writers were equipped to handle and deal with and explore ultimately to a degree that was justifiable for actually sort of pursuing it in the first place. I mean, so you have done more work for actually putting across the ideas successfully than the game did, because I kind of went through it and I felt like there was no arc for Chris. And granted, a lot of it is heavy emphasis on the final scene, when he's back in the pub eating a meal, and then he's get called out to a job, and he just goes out and does it. I was like, is that the conclusion? It's like this, this guy's he's got so much of a sort of like a burden of sort of, guilt and PTSD, and he literally goes out and just goes and relives it all over again during the campaign. And then he ends up obviously losing, the guy who brought him back into the fray. And his lesson learned was that, I'm just gonna go out and do my job normally now. Thanks, I'm cured. It didn't hit any kind of like note that I thought was palatable for what they were covering.